Tony Fonts first came to dive on the Great Barrier Reef in the 1970s after seeing pictures in National Geographic. Entranced by the colour and life of the reef, he never left.
Well, the Great Barrier Reef has certainly earned its name as the Great Barrier Reef. There's no doubt about it. It's one of the prime coral reefs on the planet. It's certainly one of the best dive sites on the planet. But over the years, it's been under pressure, and unfortunately we're seeing that now.
Now, this natural wonder, just metres from here, is under threat. Cyclones, farming pollution and the crown of thorn starfish have all played a part. But plans to build one of the world's biggest coal mines and a port are alarming tourism operators, scientists and green campaigners.
Well, I've certainly enjoyed my time on the Great Barrier Reef because it is the coral reef on the world. It's the icon of coral reefs. Unfortunately, since I've been here, I've seen changes, and none of them for the better.
Scientists say the reef has lost half its coral cover in the past 30 years, and most of the reasons are rooted in human activity. Whether it's the local issues of development on the Queensland coast, port dredging, or the agricultural runoff that helps the coral-eating crown of thorns starfish to thrive. But as Ian McCalman, an author and reef historian, explains, climate change is now the biggest single threat to the fragile ecosystem of the Great Barrier Reef.
The thing is, corals and barrier reef corals in particular are evolved to be able to cope with a temperature of around about 28.7, something like that. It only needs to go up a degree or so, and the corals have inside them a little plant that enables them to grow. If it loses that little creature, it just goes like a big dead skeleton.
The reef's health is deteriorating so quickly, UNESCO is considering placing it on the agency's World Heritage in Danger list when it meets next month. It is concerned about the expansion of coal ports, such as Abbott Point, near the Whitsundays, which would export coal from proposed mines in the Galilee Basin to India.
I think in certain places along the coast, the government has put the mining interests and the port interests ahead of the environment. And we've seen that in a number of locations and a number of changes. I mean, the Abbott Point was a classic one. Same with Gladstone.
For the government, a UNESCO intervention would be embarrassing and may hurt the $5 billion a year reef tourism industry. In response, Greg Hunt, Australia's Environment Minister, has published a new reef protection plan and backtracked on his previous decision to allow dumping of dredge spoil from Abbott Point Port in the Reef Marine Park.
My hope, my belief, my expectation is that it will be taken off the watch list this year under us, and that's because we have done the science to look at both the strengths and the challenges. We've done a long-term plan out to 2050, which is backed by over $2 billion in the coming 10 years.
In a blow to the coal industry, Mr Hunt is banning dumping of dredge spoil in the marine park, which makes the proposed expansion of 5 ports along the coast more expensive. Big Coal says UNESCO is tilting the scales towards environmental groups like Greenpeace, which they say want to put a halt to coal mining.
Certainly it's handed a powerful propaganda weapon to the NGOs in campaigning against projects such as the Abbott Point port development and the Galilee Basin, but it's also probably made some of the financial institutions rather cautious.
Greenpeace counters that the government's reef plan does not tackle climate change, and Canberra is supporting the development of the Galilee Basin, a move that will pump hundreds of millions of tonnes of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere every year.
The influence of coal companies is large, and I think that part of that influence is the direct donations that they are giving to our political parties. And I mean, I think, these companies don't give money away and expect nothing in return.
Russell Reichelt is Chief Executive of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority, the independent but government-funded group charged with looking after the reef. He acknowledges climate change is the biggest threat to the reef, but says his organisation should focus on local issues such as water quality, coastal development and overfishing.
Look, the plan is designed for the action to build the resilience of the reef. Now, there is another convention called the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is to deal with the global problem of greenhouse gas emissions and global warming greenhouse effects.
He says opposing coal fields in the Galilee Basin goes beyond the authorities' remit.
I see the coal issue globally as driven by demand, not supply. Essentially, the Stone Age didn't end because the world ran out of stone. I think what the world should be doing is focusing on new technologies. I'm totally convinced that we need to dramatically reduce greenhouse emissions, including from coal. How to do that is a far bigger problem than managing the barrier reef.
Last year, Australia, which is one of the biggest coal exporters in the world, became the first country to repeal a carbon tax. But Mr. Hunt insists the country is serious about tackling climate change.
We're not going to just hit our targets, we will meet and beat the targets.
Mr. Hunt's optimism is not shared by many scientists, who point to figures showing Australia's carbon dioxide emissions have increased since the carbon tax was scrapped. Back on the reef, Jan Claxton has been taking tourists out on day trips around the Whitsunday Island since 2001. Her business just had its best year ever, but she fears for the future, both for the reef and her business.
You know, we have our lives invested in our business. We're not talking about 100 years from now, we're talking about 10 to 20 years from now. The Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority themselves said that climate change is going to be the biggest threat to the reef, and if your coral is already battling to survive because of sedimentation and poor water quality, it'll have no chance into the future. So it is a huge financial worry for us, besides the fact that it is not really our environment to wreck in the first place.
This two-storey virtual reef at the Queensland University of Technology captures some of the beauty of the underwater world, from damselfish and stingrays to sharks and turtles. The fear of many scientists is that unless Australia's government takes the threat posed by climate change more seriously, this might be as close as the next generation gets to seeing the reef for themselves. Jamie Smyth, Financial Times, Brisbane.